Question 1. In a case where a defendant has been charged with first-degree murder, the prosecution argues that the killing was premeditated, while the defense claims it was a spontaneous act of passion. The defendant had a long-standing argument with the victim and shot them immediately after a heated exchange. Which element of crime does the defense need to establish to argue for a lesser charge of manslaughter? A. Actus reus. B. Mens rea. C. Duress. D. Mistake of fact. Answer: B. Mens rea. Explanation: to argue for a lesser charge of manslaughter, the defense must address the mental state mens rea of the defendant at the time of the crime. First-degree murder typically involves specific intent, meaning the defendant planned or premeditated the killing. Manslaughter, however, often involves a killing committed in the heat of passion or under provocation, where the defendant did not have the specific intent to kill but acted recklessly, impulsively due to overwhelming emotions. The defense needs to show that the defendant lacked the specific intent, mens rea, for murder, thus reducing the charge to manslaughter. Actus reus refers to the physical act of committing the crime, which in this case is the act of shooting. Duress, C, and mistake of fact, D, are not relevant here, as there is no claim that the defendant was coerced or misled regarding the facts of the situation. Question 2. During an investigation, law enforcement seizes a suspect's phone without warrant, arguing it is such incident to arrest. The defendant challenges this action, claiming it violates their Fourth Amendment rights. How should the court address this issue? A. The search is lawful because the arrest was valid. B. The search is lawful if the phone was in plain view. C. The search is unlawful because warrant was not obtained. D. The search is lawful because it was conducted during custodial interrogation. Answer: C. The search is unlawful because a warrant was not obtained. Explanation: the Fourth Amendment protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures, requiring law enforcement to obtain a warrant supported by probable cause, unless an exception applies, while searches incident to arrest allow officers to search the person and the immediate area surrounding them. This does not extend to digital devices like phones without a warrant. In Riley v. California, 2014, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that law enforcement must obtain a warrant to search a cell phone seized during an arrest. This case established the need for privacy protection in digital data. Thus, absent exigent circumstances or consent, the search of the phone in this situation would be considered unlawful. A. The search is lawful because the arrest was valid. While arrests are lawful in this case, the search of the phone still requires a warrant. B. The search is lawful if the phone was in plain view. The plain view doctrine does not apply here, as the phone was seized from the suspect, not discovered during a visual search. D. The search is lawful because it was conducted during a custodial interrogation. This justification is also not applicable to the search of the phone itself. Question 3. In a criminal trial, the defendant claims that they acted under duress after receiving a threat to their family. The prosecution argues that the defendant could have avoided the crime by seeking police assistance. Which principle does the defense need to establish for the duress defense to be valid? A. The threat was immediate and severe enough to compel action. B. The defendant was unaware of the law and made a mistake of fact. C. The defendant had no knowledge of the crime being committed. D. The defendant was acting in self-defense against the threat. Answer A. The threat was immediate and severe enough to compel action. Explanation: the duress defense can be raised when a defendant commits a crime due to a threat of imminent harm, such as the harm to their family in this case. For the defense to be valid, the defendant must demonstrate that the threat was both immediate and severe enough to compel the commission of the crime. The defense of duress does not apply if the defendant could have avoided the criminal act by seeking assistance from law enforcement or other authorities. Additionally, the threat must be of harm that outweighs the crime itself. B. The defendant was unaware of the law and made a mistake of fact. This is a defense for a mistake of law, not duress. C. The defendant had no knowledge of the crime being committed. This would refer to an issue of knowledge or intent, not duress. D. The defendant was acting in self-defense against a threat. Self-defense is a separate legal defense where the defendant uses force to protect themselves, not based on the threat of harm to others. Question 4. While investigating a case of arson, authorities discover that the defendant had been involved in a scheme where they intentionally set a series of fires to collect insurance money. The defendant claims that they were coerced into committing the crime by a third party who threatened to harm their family. How should the court evaluate the defendant's claim of duress, and what factors are necessary for the defense to be successful? A. The defendant must prove that the threat was immediate and severe enough to compel the action, and there was no reasonable alternative to committing the crime. B. The defendant must show that they were unable to understand the wrongfulness of their actions due to a mental illness. C. The defendant must demonstrate that they acted in self-defense because they feared for their family's safety. D. The defendant must prove that the crime was committed due to mistake of law, mistake of fact. Answer A. The defendant must prove that the threat was immediate and severe enough to compel the action, and there was no reasonable alternative to committing the crime. Explanation: the duress defense applies when a defendant commits a crime because they are coerced by a threat of imminent harm, such as the threat to harm their family in this scenario. For the defense to be successful, the defendant must prove that the threat was immediate, severe, and so overwhelming that it caused commit the crime. Moreover, the defendant must show that there were no reasonable alternatives to committing the crime. This is critical because the law does not excuse illegal actions. If the defendant could have avoided the crime by seeking police assistance or using other lawful means, in this case, the defendant would need to demonstrate that the threat of harm was so immediate and unavoidable that it left them with no other choice. B. The defendant must show that they were to understand the wrongfulness of their actions due to a mental illness. This relates to the insanity defense, not duress. C. The defendant must demonstrate that they acted in self-defense. Self-defense applies when an individual uses force to protect themselves, not in the context of being coerced into committing a crime. D. The defendant must prove that the crime was committed due to a mistake of law. This would involve the defendant claiming they didn't know, which isn't the case here. Question 5. In a complex fraud case, the defendant is accused of embezzling funds from their employer by systematically diverting money into personal accounts. The defendant argues that they had no intention to permanently deprive the employer of the funds and only took the money to cover personal debts, intending to repay it later. What must the prosecution prove to secure a conviction for embezzlement in this case? A. The defendant had a specific intent to defraud the employer and deprive them of the property. B. The defendant's actions were part of a scheme to misappropriate funds without the employer's consent. C. The defendant was unaware that embezzlement was a criminal offense. D. The defendant acted with recklessness and the amount of money taken was substantial. Answer A. The defendant had a specific intent to defraud the employer and deprive them of the property. Explanation: embezzlement is a type of theft that involves the unlawful taking of property entrusted to the defendant's care, usually in an employment or fiduciary capacity. For the prosecution to secure conviction, it must prove that the defendant specifically intended to defraud the employer and permanently deprive them of the funds. The defendant's claim that intended to repay the funds later would not negate the essential element of fraudulent intent required for embezzlement. Unlike larceny, which focuses on taking property without consent, embezzlement involves breach of trust where the defendant initially had legal access to the property. Therefore, the prosecution must show that the defendant's actions were deliberate and aimed at permanently depriving the employer of their assets. B. The defendant's actions were seen to misappropriate funds without the employer's consent. While this is true, the key element of embezzlement is the intent to permanently deprive, not just misappropriation. C. The defendant was unaware that embezzlement was a criminal offense. Ignorance of the law is not valid defense to embezzlement. D. The defendant acted with recklessness and the amount of money taken was substantial. Recklessness is not a required element in embezzlement, and the prosecution focus on specific intent rather than the amount of money. Question 6. When dealing with a complex system that shows occasional irregularities in its operation, law enforcement seizes a large quantity of digital evidence during the investigation. The evidence is stored on a cloud-based platform and the authorities did not obtain a warrant for accessing the platform. The defendant argues that this search violates their Fourth Amendment rights. What key factors must the court consider to determine whether the cloud data was lawful? Whether the defendant had a reasonable expectation of privacy in the cloud data and whether a warrant was obtained. B. Whether the search occurred during a lawful arrest and whether the data was in plain view. C. Whether the authorities were aware of the defendant's criminal activity before accessing the cloud data. D. Whether the data was obtained as part of an international investigation and whether international laws were followed. Answer A. Whether the defendant had a reasonable expectation of privacy in the cloud data and whether a warrant was obtained. Explanation. Under the Fourth Amendment, individuals are protected from unreasonable searches and seizures, and law enforcement generally needs a warrant to search private property. In the case of digital evidence, the key issue is whether the defendant had a reasonable expectation of privacy in the cloud data. The Fourth Amendment applies to information stored online just as it does to physical property. In Riley v. California, 2014, the U.S. Supreme Court held that a warrant is required to search digital data, including information stored in the cloud. The court will consider whether the defendant had an expectation of privacy in the cloud-based data, and if so, whether the search was justified by a valid warrant. B. Whether the search occurred during a lawful arrest and whether the data was in plain view. This would apply to physical searches, not cloud-based data. C. Whether the authorities were aware of the defendant's criminal activity before accessing the cloud data. This is not the determining factor for the lawfulness of the search. D. Whether the data was obtained as part of an international investigation and whether international laws were followed. International laws and procedures are not the main issue here. It is about domestic constitutional protections. Question 7. In a case of cybercrime, the defendant is charged with identity theft after unlawfully accessing a series of online accounts and using personal information to make unauthorized purchases. The defendant claims they were unaware that their actions were illegal. What legal principle must the prosecution establish to secure a conviction for identity theft? A. The defendant acted with the specific intent to steal personal information and use it for fraudulent purposes. B. The defendant acted under duress, fearing harm if they did not engage in identity theft. C. The defendant made a mistake of law, not realizing that accessing the accounts was a crime. D. The defendant was unaware of the fraudulent purchases and had no involvement in them. Answer A. The defendant acted with the specific intent to steal personal information and use it for fraudulent purposes. Explanation. Identity theft involves unlawfully obtaining and using another person's personal information for fraudulent purposes, such as making unauthorized purchases or committing other crimes. For the prosecution to prove identity theft, it must establish that the defendant had the specific intent to steal the personal information and for fraudulent purposes. The defendant's claim of not knowing the actions were illegal is not valid defense, as ignorance of the law is not an excuse, ignorantia juris non excusat. The prosecution must show that the defendant's actions were deliberate and intended to defraud the victims. B. The defendant acted under duress. Duress is defense that applies when person is coerced into committing crime, which does not apply in this case. C. The defendant. Mistake of law. Mistake of law is not valid defense in identity theft cases, as the defendant is expected to know the law. D. The defendant was unaware of the fraudulent purchases. This would be defense to the crime of fraud, not identity theft, as the key issue is the defendant's intent to steal and use the personal information. Question 8. In a domestic violence case, the defendant is charged with assault after allegedly striking their partner during an argument. The defendant claims they acted in self-defense because they feared immediate harm from their partner, who had a history of violence. What factors must the court consider to determine if the defendant's claim of self-defense is valid? A. Whether the defendant had reasonable belief that they were in immediate danger and used proportionate force in response. B. Whether the defendant acted in defense of property to prevent damage during the altercation. C. Whether the defendant was provoked by the victim's verbal insults during the argument. D. Whether the defendant was acting in defense of others who were present during the altercation. Answer A. Whether the defendant had a reasonable belief that they were in immediate danger and used proportionate force in response. Explanation. Self-defense is a justification defense where a defendant claims that their actions were necessary to protect themselves from imminent harm. The court will consider whether the defendant had a reasonable belief that they were in immediate danger of being harmed by their partner and whether the force used was proportional to the threat. The defendant is not allowed to use excessive force in self-defense, and the threat must be imminent and unavoidable. The fact that the partner had a history of violence may help establish that the defendant had a reasonable belief that harm was imminent, but this must still be evaluated in the context of the specific incident. B. Whether the defendant acted in defense of property to prevent damage during the altercation. Self-defense applies to protecting oneself. Physical harm, not to defending property. C. Whether the defendant was provoked by the victim's verbal insults during the argument. Verbal provocation alone does not justify the use of force under self-defense laws. D. Whether the defendant was acting in defense of others who were present during the altercation. This would be defense of others claim, which is distinct from self-defense. Question 9. The suspect is arrested and charged with possession of illegal drugs with intent to distribute. During the arrest, law enforcement officers searched the suspect's vehicle without warrant and found large quantity of narcotics. The suspect's attorney files motion to suppress the evidence, arguing that the search was unconstitutional. Well, must the court determine to decide if the evidence should be excluded? A. Whether the suspect voluntarily consented to the search, or if the search fell under an exception to the warrant requirement. B. Whether the suspect was aware that the possession of narcotics was illegal at the time of the arrest. C. Whether the officers believed that the suspect had committed crime even if they lacked probable cause for the search. D. Whether the suspect had prior criminal record related to drug offences. Answer A. Whether the suspect voluntarily consented to the search, or if the search fell under an exception to the warrant requirement. Explanation. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, requiring law enforcement to obtain a warrant before conducting a search, unless an exception applies. Some common exceptions include consent. If the suspect voluntarily consented to the search, a warrant is not required. Probable cause. Automobile exception. If officers had probable cause to believe the vehicle contained contraband, they could search it without a warrant. Search incident to arrest. If the search was conducted as part of a lawful arrest, some evidence may be admissible. The court must determine whether one of these exceptions applies before deciding whether to exclude the evidence. B. Whether the suspect was aware that the possession of narcotics was illegal. Ignorance of the law is not a defense. C. Whether the officers believed that the suspect had committed a crime. Officers must have probable cause, not just a belief. D. Whether the suspect had a prior criminal record. A prior record does not justify an unconstitutional search. Question 10. During a criminal trial, the prosecution introduces an incriminating statement made by the defendant while in police custody. The defendant argues that the statement should be excluded because they were not informed of their Miranda rights. What key factor must the court consider to determine whether the statement is admissible? A. Whether the defendant was subjected to custodial interrogation without being read their Miranda rights. B. Whether the defendant later confessed voluntarily to the same crime outside of police custody. C. Whether the prosecution can prove the defendant committed the crime without the statement. D. Whether the defendant's statement was recorded as part of official police documentation. Answer A. Whether the defendant was subjected to custodial interrogation without being read their Miranda rights. Explanation. Under Miranda v. Arizona, 1966, law enforcement officers must inform suspects of their right to remain silent and their right to an attorney before conducting a custodial interrogation. If the suspect was in police custody and interrogated without receiving a Miranda warning, the statement may be excluded from evidence. B. Whether the defendant later confessed voluntarily. A later confession does not automatically make the first improperly obtained statement admissible. C. Whether the prosecution can prove the crime without the statement. While the prosecution must prove its case, this does not determine the admissibility of the defendant's statement. D. Whether the defendant's statement was recorded. Recorded statement does not cure Miranda violation. Question 11. A defendant is charged with conspiracy to commit fraud after allegedly working with others to defraud investors. However, the defendant claims that they withdrew from the conspiracy before any fraudulent actions took place. What must the defendant prove to establish a valid withdrawal defense? A. The defendant took affirmative steps to withdraw from the conspiracy and communicated this withdrawal to co-conspirators. B. The defendant was unaware of the conspiracy's illegal nature at the time of involvement. C. The defendant was coerced into joining the conspiracy but did not actively participate. D. The defendant was not the mastermind behind the conspiracy and had minor role. Answer A. The defendant took affirmative steps to withdraw from the conspiracy and communicated this withdrawal to co-conspirators. Explanation. A withdrawal defense in a conspiracy case requires the defendant to show that they took affirmative steps to withdraw before any criminal act was committed. This usually means clearly communicating withdrawal. The defendant must notify co-conspirators of their intent to leave the conspiracy. Disassociating from criminal conduct. The defendant must not participate in any further acts related to the conspiracy. B. The defendant was unaware of the conspiracy's illegal nature. Ignorance of the law does not excuse participation in conspiracy. C. The defendant was coerced. Coercion may be defense to joining conspiracy but does not prove withdrawal. D. The defendant had minor role. even minor participant is guilty if they remain involved. Question 12. An individual is charged with attempted robbery after being caught near the scene with a weapon and a mask. The defendant argues that they abandoned the plan before committing any crime. Under what circumstances can abandonment be used as a defense to attempt charges? A. The abandonment must be voluntary and occur before a substantial step toward the crime is taken. B. The abandonment must be involuntary due to law enforcement intervention. C. The defendant must prove that they were coerced into participating in the plan initially. D. The defendant must demonstrate that they were only present at the scene but had no intention of committing the crime. Answer A. The abandonment must be voluntary and occur before a substantial step toward the crime is taken. Explanation. For abandonment to be a valid defense in an attempt charge, the defendant must show that they voluntarily renounced their criminal intent before taking a substantial step toward completing the crime. A substantial step is any significant action that strongly indicates the crime would have been carried out had there not been an intervention. The abandonment must be involuntary. If law enforcement intervened, the abandonment was not voluntary, so it is not a valid defense. C. The defendant was coerced. Coercion is a separate defense but does not establish voluntary abandonment. D. The defendant was present at the scene. Mere presence is not an abandonment defense if intent and preparation were demonstrated. Question 13. A defendant is convicted of burglary and sentenced to prison. On appeal, the defendant argues that their Sixth Amendment rights were violated because they were denied the right to confront a witness who provided crucial testimony. What must the appellate court determine to decide if the conviction should be overturned? A. Whether the defendant was denied the opportunity to cross-examine the witness whose testimony was used against them. B. Whether the witness's testimony was recorded and available for review. C. Whether the defendant's attorney was given chance to object to the testimony before trial. D. Whether the testimony was presented by an expert witness instead of an eyewitness. Answer A. Whether the defendant was denied the opportunity to cross-examine the witness whose testimony was used against them. Explanation. The Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to confront witnesses, meaning the defense must have the opportunity to cross-examine prosecution witnesses. If the defendant was denied this right, their conviction may be overturned. B. The testimony was recorded. A recorded statement does not replace the right to cross-examine. C. The objecting before trial. The issue is the right to cross-examine, not just an objection. D. The testimony was from an expert. All prosecution witnesses must be subject to cross-examination. Question 14. In a situation where formal requirements conflict with operational realities, a logistics company is implementing a new compliance policy that requires detailed documentation for every package processed. However, warehouse employees report that the added documentation slows down workflows, causing shipment delays. What is the most effective approach for balancing compliance with operational efficiency? A. Mandate strict adherence to the new policy and enforce penalties for non-compliance. B. Conduct a time-motion study to identify bottlenecks and propose streamlined documentation methods. C. Reduce the documentation requirements to speed up processing, even if compliance is compromised. D. Assign additional employees to handle documentation separately from warehouse operations. Answer. B. Conduct a time-motion study to identify bottlenecks and propose streamlined documentation methods. Explanation. A compliance policy requiring extensive documentation can create inefficiencies in warehouse operations. The best approach is not to enforce penalties, as this could reduce morale and productivity. Similarly, reducing documentation requirements, C, could compromise regulatory compliance. Assigning additional D may temporarily alleviate the issue but does not address the root cause. A time-motion study B helps analyze inefficiencies and develop optimized solutions, balancing compliance with operational efficiency. Question 15. During a comprehensive review of a process that needs improvement, a healthcare facility identifies inefficiencies in patient discharge procedures. Nurses report that excessive paperwork and slow coordination with billing cause unnecessary delays, frustrating both staff and patients. Which of the following solutions would most effectively improve the discharge process? A. Implement a digital discharge tracking system to coordinate between departments in real time. B. Hire additional staff solely for handling discharge paperwork. C. Extend hospital stays to ensure billing is completed before patients leave. D. Require nurses to prioritize discharge tasks over other duties. Answer A. Implement a digital discharge tracking system to coordinate between departments in real time. Explanation: discrepancies between an airline's reservation system and third-party platforms cause booking errors. Limiting third-party bookings A. reduces revenue opportunities. Manual verification B. is inefficient for high-volume system, requiring passenger confirmation. D. places unnecessary burden on customers. An autumn synchronization system C. ensures real-time updates, reducing errors and improving booking accuracy. Question 16. In an environment where different components must interact efficiently, an airline is upgrading its reservation system to integrate with third-party travel platforms. However, discrepancies in pricing and seat availability are causing booking errors. What is the most effective strategy for resolving these issues? A. limit third-party bookings until the discrepancies are fully addressed. B. manually verify all reservations before finalizing ticket issuance. C. develop an automated synchronization system to update pricing and availability in real time. D. require passengers to confirm their bookings via phone before traveling. Answer: C. develop an automated synchronization system to update pricing and availability in real time. Explanation: discrepancies between an airline's reservation system and third-party platforms cause booking errors. Limiting third-party bookings A. reduces revenue opportunities. Manual verification B. is inefficient for high-volume system, requiring passenger confirmation. D. places unnecessary burden on customers. An autumn synchronization system C. ensures real-time updates, reducing errors and improving booking accuracy. Question 17. While managing a hybrid approach where timing issues create inefficiencies, a retail chain is transitioning to an automated inventory management system while still allowing manual stock adjustments in certain locations. Store managers complain about mismatches between reported stock levels and actual inventory. Which action would best ensure accurate inventory tracking across all locations? A. completely remove manual adjustments and rely solely on the automated system. B. implement a reconciliation process where automated and manual data are cross-checked regularly. C. allow each store to decide whether to use manual or automated tracking based on its needs. D. increase the frequency of physical inventory counts and audits. Answer: B. implement a reconciliation process where automated and manual data are cross-checked regularly. Explanation: a hybrid inventory system combining manual and automated processes can lead to inconsistencies. Removing manual adjustments may not be feasible for all stores. Allowing each store to choose C creates inconsistency. Increasing physical audits D is helpful but labor-intensive. A reconciliation process ensures accurate inventory tracking by cross-checking both data sources. Question 18. When scaling up operations that experience significant logistical challenges, a global e-commerce company is expanding its distribution network. The rapid growth has led to bottlenecks in order fulfillment, increased shipping costs, and delays in high-demand regions. What is the best strategic approach to address these challenges? A. increase warehouse staff and shipping partners in affected regions. B. implement a data-driven demand forecasting system to optimize inventory placement. C. expand distribution centers evenly across all operational areas. D. offer discounts to customers who select slow shipping options. Answer: B. implement a data-driven demand forecasting system to optimize inventory placement. Explanation: scaling e-commerce operations requires efficient logistics. Hiring more staff A. does not address route inefficiencies. Expanding distribution evenly C. may not align with demand. Offering discounts D. does not solve supply chain issues. A demand forecasting system B. helps predict demand patterns and optimize warehouse locations, improving efficiency. Question 19. In a multi-location scenario where consistency requirements are critical, a national fast food chain notices that customers in different regions receive inconsistent service times and product quality. Franchise managers cite differences in staffing levels, local supply chains, and customer demand. What is the most effective solution to maintain consistency across all locations? A. standardize processes by implementing a uniform training and auditing system. B. allow each franchise to develop its own operational procedures based on regional needs. C. focus on improving underperforming locations while leaving high-performing stores unchanged. D. reduce menu options to simplify operations across all locations. Answer A. Standardized processes by implementing a uniform training and auditing system. Explanation: consistency is crucial in multi-location businesses, allowing each franchise to develop its own processes. B. Leads to inconsistency, focusing only on underperforming locations. C. Ignores systemic issues, reducing menu options. D. May simplify operations but does not address service inconsistency. A standardized training and auditing system. A. Ensures uniform service and quality. Question 20. While updating traditional approaches where interconnections create unforeseen complications, the university is shifting from paper-based student records to a fully digital system. Faculty members report difficulties accessing historical data, and some administrative functions experience delays due to integration issues. Which approach would best address these transition challenges? A. Maintain dual paper and digital records until full integration is achieved. B. Train faculty and staff on the new system before phasing out paper records. C. Require students to submit records manually while the system is being optimized. D. Revert to the paper-based system and reconsider digital adoption at a later date. Answer B. Train faculty and staff on the new system before phasing out paper records. Explanation: transitioning to digital records requires proper change management. Maintaining dual records A. creates inefficiencies, requiring students to submit records manually. C. Adds administrative burdens. Reverting to paper-based systems. D. Halts progress. Providing training before fully transitioning. B. Ensures a smooth adoption process. Question 21. In a scenario where efficiency decreases across multiple departments due to outdated workflow management, what is the most effective long-term solution? A. Assign additional staff to handle workflow bottlenecks. B. Implement an automated workflow management system to optimize processes. C. Conduct daily manual checks to track workflow efficiency. D. Allow each department to independently redesign their processes. Answer is B. Implement an automated workflow management system to optimize. Explanation: assigning more staff is a short-term fix that does not improve efficiency. C. Daily manual checks are time-consuming and inefficient. D. Independent redesigns can lead to inconsistencies and inefficiencies. B. Automated workflow system streamlines processes, reduces errors, and enhances coordination across departments. Question 22. During a major transformation where existing methods are being replaced, employees resist the new system. How should leadership respond? A. Mandate the use of the new system without exceptions. B. Conduct change management sessions and provide hands-on training. C. Allow employees to continue using the old system while phasing in changes gradually. D. Offer incentives for employees who fully adopt the new system. Answer is B. Conduct change management sessions and provide hands-on training. Explanation: mandating use without exceptions can cause frustration and resistance. C. Allowing dual systems creates inefficiencies and delays full implementation. D. Incentives may help adoption but does not address concerns or training needs. B. Change management and training helps employees adjust, reduces resistance, and ensures smooth integration. Question 23. In a high-stakes environment where multiple challenges arise simultaneously, how should a leader prioritize tasks? A. Address issues as they come up, focusing on the most vocal complaints first. B. Categorize issues by urgency and impact, addressing high-priority items first. C. Delegate all responsibilities evenly across teams without prioritization. D. Focus on resolving minor issues first to create quick wins before addressing major problems. Answer is B. Categorize issues by urgency and impact, addressing high-priority items first. Explanation: addressing vocal complaints first may not align with actual priorities. C. Even distribution without prioritization can lead to inefficiencies. D. Focusing on minor issues first delays critical problem solving. B. Prioritizing by urgency and impact ensures that the most important challenges are handled first. Max efficiency. Question 24. While investigating inconsistencies across various units of an organization, leadership discovers that different teams follow conflicting procedures. What is the best approach? A. Require all teams to immediately adopt a single standardized procedure. B. Identify best practices across teams and develop a unified policy. C. Allow teams to continue using their existing procedures while improving communication. D. Eliminate the least efficient teams and reallocate their resources. Answer is B. Identify best practices across teams and develop a unified policy. Explanation: forcing immediate adoption of one procedure can cause resistance. C. Allowing existing conflicting procedures does not solve the problem. D. Eliminating teams is an extreme and ineffective response. B. Developing a unified policy based on best practices ensures a smooth transition while improving efficiency. Question 25. When implementing backup procedures across various departments, inconsistencies in compliance are observed. How should management address this? A. Implement a centralized monitoring system to ensure compliance. B. Allow each department to decide how to implement backups based on their needs. C. Conduct annual reviews to check for compliance. D. Remove departments that fail to comply with standard procedures. Answer is A. Implement a centralized monitoring system to ensure compliance. Explanation. B. Allowing independent decisions creates inconsistency and risk. C. Annual reviews are too infrequent to catch ongoing issues. D. Removing departments is excessive and does not address the root problem. Centralized monitoring ensures consistency and accountability. Question 26. During an emergency response where multiple areas are impacted, what is the most effective approach? A. Focus on the most critical areas first while coordinating with other teams. B. Address all affected areas simultaneously, dividing resources equally. C. Delay response until a full assessment is completed. D. Assign resources based on political or financial considerations. Answer is A. Focus on the most critical areas first while coordinating with other teams. Explanation. B. Dividing resources equally may not align with actual needs. C. Delaying response for full assessment wastes valuable time. D. Assigning resources based on politics finance can lead to unfair and inefficient decisions. EK. Prioritizing critical areas and coordinating teams ensures an effective and timely response. Question 27. When scaling up operations that experience significant variability in demand, how can a company best maintain efficiency? A. Use predictive analytics to forecast demand and adjust operations accordingly. B. Maintain a fixed workforce regardless of demand fluctuations. C. Increase storage capacity to accommodate excess supply. D. Reduce service offerings to simplify operations. Answer is A. Use predictive analytics to forecast demand and adjust operations accordingly. Explanation. B. Fixed workforce leads to inefficiencies. C. Increasing storage is costly and does not address demand fluctuations. D. Reducing services may negatively impact customer satisfaction. A. Predictive analytics allows for demand-based adjustments, improving efficiency. Question 28. In a case where multiple parties have different objectives for a shared project, what is the best conflict resolution approach? A. Establish a clear framework that balances all stakeholders' needs. B. Allow the most influential party to dictate the project's direction. C. Force all parties to compromise equally regardless of impact. D. Disband the project if agreement cannot be reached. Answer is A. Establish a clear framework that balances all stakeholders' needs. Explanation. B. Giving power to the most influential party creates unfairness. C. Forcing equal compromise may not result in the best outcome. D. Disbanding the project is an extreme reaction. Balancing needs through framework ensures collaboration and fairness. Question 29. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in a manufacturing process, the team finds multiple contributing factors. What is the best method for addressing the issue? A. Use a root cause analysis method such as the 5 whys to identify and resolve core issues. B. Focus on fixing the most visible issues first. C. Implement a temporary solution while continuing normal operations. D. Assign blame to different departments based on their level of involvement. Answer is A. Use a root cause analysis method such as the 5 whys to identify and resolve core issues. Explanation. B. Fixing visible issues first does not address underlying causes. C. Temporary solutions may not be sustainable. D. Assigning blame damages teamwork. Root cause analysis ensures the real problem is solved. Question 30. When implementing new protocols in a shared environment, how should an organization ensure smooth adoption? A. Conduct training sessions and provide ongoing support. B. Announce the change and expect immediate compliance. C. Allow teams to decide individually whether to adopt the protocols. D. Introduce the protocols gradually but with minimal oversight. Answer is A. Conduct training sessions and provide ongoing support. Explanation. B. Expecting immediate compliance leads to resistance. C. Allowing optional adoption results in inconsistency. D. Gradual introduction without oversight can lead to confusion. Training and support ensures successful adoption.